Not good. Anyway, it is what it is. Vamos. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are starting the Sefer Kinyan, the 12th chapter, learning today's 3 prakim, which will be Aleph, Beis, Gimel, and Hilchos Mechira. But let's begin with the introduction. Says the Rambam, as he always begins the Sefer, B'Shem Hashem Keil Olam. And the pasuk that the Rambam chooses to put in the header is Reishis Chachma Kenei Chachma. The beginning of wisdom is the understanding that you have to acquire wisdom. It's all about bittul, as the Alter Rebbe explains. If a person thinks they have it, then they don't. Now, with all your resources, you will gain understanding. So there's Chachma and there's Bina, and the pasuk juxtaposes with the word of Kinyan the importance of Bina. This is going to be the 12th chapter. The Rambam is calling it the book of acquisition, Sefer Kinyan, Hilchos of Chamesh, V'zeu Siduram, the laws of Mechira, which will be the first series that we will be learning today. The laws regarding selling, Hilchos Zechio Umatana, the laws of acquisition, the laws of gifts, which are 1, Hilchos Shchenim, the laws concerning neighbors, Hilchos Shluchim V'shutfim, the laws about agents and partners, and the final in this series will be the Hilchos Avadim, the laws regarding servants. And as the Rambam is going to go into details, the laws of Mechira, Hilchos Mechira, Yesh B'chlal and Chamash Mitzvahs, we have in it 5 commandments, Achas Mitzvahs Aseh, V'arba Mitzvahs Lois Aseh, V'zeu Pratan. Number 1, Aleph Din Mekach Umimkar, the laws of buying and selling. Number 2, Shelo Yoina B'mekach Umimkar, not to cheat. This is referring to cheating by overcharging, as we'll learn details. And number 3, Shelo Yoina B'dvarim. I know Yoina means cheating. When we speak about not to cheat with words, it also means not to cause discomfort using words, as we'll see more details. Mitzvah 4, negative. Shelo Yoina Ger Tzedek B'mamoinoi. Don't cheat a convert financially. So there's a specific not cheating for converts. And similarly, Shelo Yoinehu B'dvarim, don't cheat converts verbally. Again, there's when a person does so to a convert, he's really violating 2. Convert is also a yid, and then you have this special sensitivity towards Gadim. And Chavra, with that, let's begin. Perek Rishon, the first chapter of Hilchos Mechira is all going to be about how does one acquire real estate. It begins with real estate based on the premise that only consent between the seller and the buyer does not finalize a sale. Even though they consented, there has to be an act that we'll call a kinyan, an act of acquisition, which needs consent. But now that you have the gemiras das, you have the consent, both of the seller and the buyer, and you did the kinyan is that which transfers the item from the original owner, from the seller, to now the buyer. And what type of kinyanim are halachically effective? So it's different when it comes to real estate. It's different when it comes to movables. The first chapter is going to speak about kinyane karka. First chapter has 20 halachas, beginning with halacha aleph, Zakta Rambam. Hamekach einoi nikna bedvarim. An article is not acquired, let's say, only through verbal agreement. The Dvarim doesn't mean words. It means that people can verbally agree, and it does nothing. And even if witnesses will testify that both the seller and the buyer verbally agreed to a transaction, it has no halachic effect as to the reality that that article was not transferred yet. Ketzad, for example, seller tells a buyer, I'm selling you this house. Same thing as on movables. Or and not only did they verbally express, so it's clear communication, what they would like to do, but they already came to a money agreement. Both sides agree to the price. And the buyer says the words, Konisi, I bought it. He says those words. You can say words until you're blue in your face. It doesn't have any effect. And the seller is happy and he says, good, I sold. Well, they both, I bought it, I sold it. And the Eidim, and Tupi, they know the people are watching and they tell the witnesses, hey, Eidim, I want you to be the witnesses. Says the Rambam, it's garnished with garnished. It's nothing. It's as if they had no such agreement altogether. And that's not only when it comes to sales, and or when a person is receiving anything. In other words, any transference of an item from the ownership of one into the ownership of another is done through a kinyan. A kinyan, as we'll see, is an act. We're going to call that the act of acquisition. And without the kinyan, nothing happened. Halacha beis. But once you did a proper kinyan, as we'll be describing, then the lekeach indeed acquires it. The einam tzrichim edim klal, and you don't need to have witnesses. Unlike, in contrast to, let's say, marriage, whereby a marriage, the edim are part of that kiddushin. If a man gives a woman a ring, and there's consent, and he gives her the ring, if you don't have people witnessing it, there is no kiddushin. That's called eidei kiyum. When it comes to kinyanim, the edim are not part of what makes the acquisition. The edim are only there to be a proof that if later one party will, God forbid, deny that it ever happened, so now you have an outside source of raya. But even though there's no edim, no one could change their minds, can go back and can retract. So let's go. So now that we established you need a kinyan, so the Rambam says it depends what we are talking about. And we're going to begin with real estate. Right? Niknas be'echad mishleish devarim. One of the three suffices. Bekesev, money, or stat document, or bechazaka. Chazaka means an action through which one will manifest their ownership over this property. They're machzik. They take it into their possession. Now, you cannot move the real estate. So as we'll learn, it's an action that manifests, that shows, it's an act that you're
moving in.
Valuable.
If you move in there.
What's that?
Real estate. If you just move in, that's chazakah.
We'll see soon. What you're saying, Yakir? We'll see soon. Wait. So now the Rambam is going to tell you about each one of the three. And there's a lot of nuance. Halacha dalet. Ketzad hakesef. Ketzad v'kesef. So I go. Mochav le'bayis le'sadam. And v'nasan le'hadamim. You have to halka. Damim is going from whom to whom? It's going from the lekeach to the moicher. Who's the final one involved in damim, guys? Who's the final one involved in damim? The moicher. It's receiving the money. Now the Rambam says something very important. But medvaram amurim, that kesef by itself can affect the kinyan, is b'makim she'ein kois v'nes hashtar. Where not everyone writes a document. It's not the norm that a document is written. I would say I'm not an expert, but Yaronis here, for sure in LA, for sure in America. You make a real estate transaction, it has to be documented. The moment you're living in a society where the norm is it's going to be documented, kesef by itself will no longer affect the king. This is very powerful. Why is that? So let me just say the words, the lamdasha words. Just the kinyan without gemiras das does nothing. Think about it. If I own real estate and I want to sell it theoretically and you want to buy it, never spoke about me selling this to you. You can give me money. If it's not clear that this is for the sale and I'm consenting to sell it, there is also no sale. So you really need to have gemiras das and a kinyan. The moment the norm is that everything is documented when it comes to selling and buying real estate, there isn't full gemiras das until the start because everyone knows it's not done yet. It has to be documented. If there's no gemiras das, then none of these kinyanim will work. Another detail, when it comes to kesef working by itself, kesef does not demand for all of the value to be paid. Kinyan kesef is enough if a small amount of the value was paid. How much? A pruta. If less than a pruta was exchanged, das ist nicht Geld. Halacha, hey, his na lekech va amar im rotzisi ekne bekesev ekne oy bishtar ekne. Now that we just established that certain places money is not enough, you have to have money on a star. What happens if the loikeach, the purchaser, says, "Listen, guys, I'm buying it. We agree to the price, but I want to add a nuance. I will determine whether only kesef will do the kinyan or whether only shtar." And v'nosav kesef al tanaiza, and the moicher accepted that condition. Then harei zakayim the ein hamoicher yochel lachzer b'pnei tanai, even in a place where the norm is you write a document. Since he said those words and the moicher accepted the tanai, so then he's open. It's done. Now, he didn't know that yet. The lekech can back out. The lekech can say, no, I did not have to meet das, but the merchant cannot. But the halakech, guys, very important. All of this is only b'makayim that people write documents. If you're living in a place where many transactions are done only with money, then even without the stipulation, no one can back out because kesef halachically is a kinyan. He can also leave the power for him to determine whether it's going to be fully formalized only bekesef, even the makim shadarkim lichtivshtar. Halacha vav. Ha'omer lechaveirayim tein mana leplani v'yakona beisilach. Give money to so and so, guys, and you'll acquire my house. So there's kesef yaron. The kesef is going from the lekeach, not to the moicha. There is a transference of money, but the money is going to go to a third party. The din is kiven shenasan kana habayis midin arev. It works, but the Rambam has to introduce how does it work. The moicher, did not receive it. So the system is like this. Just like we will learn that when a person guarantees, let's say a loan, doesn't have to be a loan. It means a person is hesitating to lend money. So a third party says, no, you lend the money, and I'm achroi for the money. The din is the arev becomes meshubed to the lender, even though no money came his way. So based on that rule, says the Rambam, a person can give over his property even though he's not getting money. It means if I can be mechayev myself, even though I'm not getting the money, I can give over my property even though I'm not getting the money. You need to have a kinyan. There was a kinyan. What was the kinyan? The lekeach gave and the third party received. There was a kinyan with the consent. Works. Now let's move on. That's a very big halacha. But now we're going to move on to shtar. Ketzad b'shtar. Kosav loy. If you document it, and it doesn't matter on what. It can be on a niyar. It can be on a cheres, which is probably quite practical. Then people had a lot of shards. Or even on a leaf. Even on a leaf. That means you're writing it on an item that will not be long lasting. You write on that Sadai Nisun Allah or Sadi Mukhur Allah Kivin Shigi Ashtar Liyadai. Now, who's the final person involved in this kinyan? The opposite of Kesef. By Kesef, who is the final party involved? I know that you can say it comes at the same time, but conceptually, by Kesef, the Moicher finalizes the kinyan. He's receiving the money. By the document, it's the opposite direction. By the document, the Moicher writes to the Lekeach, I am selling this to you. What does the kinyan? The loikeach receiving it. Kana. And just like by Kesef, the Edom are Ede Birur, here also that way. Afal Pisha Ain't Shamedim Klal, Afal Pisha Ain't Ashtar Shava Klum. And let me add, and you're using a leaf, which means the document won't endure for a substantial amount of time. Doesn't matter. That's the kinyan. This emphasis of who is the final party involved in the kinyan is very important for the following. When you have a transaction, there are two people involved, a seller and a buyer. What is the main part of the kinyan? The seller relinquishing his ownership or the buyer taking ownership? And that's extremely significant. And depending on what kinyan, accordingly, I would argue that the last party is the ikar. Giving money means nothing if you don't receive it. The recipient is the one that does it. If there's no recipient, there's no giver. Who creates the giver is the recipient. That's a theme we have a lot in Hasidus. So whether the moicher is the recipient or whether the loikeach is the recipient will determine who is the ikar, who is the main player in the kingdom. Let's go right. That a document itself finalizes the sale, even though no money was exchanged. If the seller, if God knows he's selling it because there's something inferior in it, and he's itching to sort of say to unload this asset. Average properties, there's nothing bad about it. Even though there's Edom, in other words, why do people sell property, Yaron? Based on a halachic premise, no one should sell property. People sell property only because they need money. They would not have that need, they would hold on to it. So since you're selling it only because you need the money, that's why we're adding over here, prior to you receiving the money, you don't have a full gemidas das. Masha'en kain, if there's something not good about this property, you're not selling it because you want the money. Because you know this is not good. That's where star works. It's all about gemidas das. If you're selling it because of the money, you have to receive the money. And let's leave that open. These are big statements, and we can spend a whole year bringing on this, but let's go back. And the third is chazaka. Again, you have to manifest ownership. You have to show ownership over it. Whether it's a sale, whether it's a gift, if the buyer locks the door, if the buyer gadar encloses the property more, paratz means he breaches that which is the enclosure, even in the most minute amount. Now another nuance. Sometimes you can close a breach and open a breach in a way that didn't make a difference. The Rambam will give examples. Now, what you did had some sort of effect to the better. That creates the kinyan. As long as the lokeach benefited from that change, I'll tell you, locking the door always brings a benefit. When the door is unlocked, you're less safe. Sometimes making the breach bigger or smaller doesn't make a difference. Right? If you have animals in a corral and it's broken open and you close it a little bit, you didn't do anything. The animals can still run out. It has to be something that benefited you. So this is the most minute amount. So when Yakir was speaking about 3 years, we'll leave that to later. That's a raya that I bought it, the fact that I was there for 3 years and no one protested. If there's a moichin and a lekeach and they have consent, and the Rambam began the chapter by saying consent in itself does nothing. You have to do an act of manifesting ownership. Now, I know that I can go to your house and lock the door, not as the owner, and a chanavi. But now that I know that I'm the new owner and I lock the door, that is showing my balabatashkeit over it. And there's another very important rule. That I did any of the above in the presence of the seller. You understand? When I go to your house as a guest, guys, and I lock the door, it means nothing. But if we're speaking about buying and selling, and we agree, I'm buying it, and I lock the door, you're watching it and not protesting is part of the proof that there's gemiras das. If I did not do it in your presence, it's not enough. or not in front of the noisen, that in itself is not enough. You have to have one pre-step. What's the pre-step? That the seller tells the buyer, Lech chazek uknei. Go and manifest your ownership over it and acquire it. Guys, we're going to learn about this very often, and it's always going to be consistent, which is helpful. And then, so when we learned this not that long ago in Bava Basra, it's coming up soon then, right? Mama soon, I think in a year and a half, whatever, 2 years. So there's the Rashbam. The Rashbam holds that when the Lokeach, the Soicher, gets the keys, that affects the king in the property. The Rambam argues with that. The Rambam says, even though giving the key is only like telling him, the giving of the key. Now, you acquire the key by taking it. That's a whole difference. Metaltalin has value. You did Hagbah, you did Mashiach. We'll learn that today in the next chapters. You're kohenet. The Rambam holds giving over the keys is not a kinyan, but it is something. It's mamash like leichazek. And now, which is what happens de facto. You go to your new apartment and you open up the door and then you lock it. Then and only then you can. And the board is a board of water and it has accessories like a bucket, and the sale includes the bucket. Now, you're not just buying the bucket, you're buying the water pit. Even when you give over the bucket, aside of the fact that the buyer now acquires the bucket, the giving over of the bucket, which is connected to that water well, but you have to make a kinyan. Let's just develop this locking of the door, whether it's a sale of a house or whether it's a sale of a yard. And while the sale happened, while they were conversing about the sale, the house was open, the doors opened. You hear that? The no'al halukeyach pesach, and he goes ahead and he closes the door. Maybe closes the door. The chazar upesach, and then he opens it up. Now, why does he have to open it up? I'll tell you why. Because there is a closing of the door, Danny, that doesn't show you're making a kinyan. Think about this, guys. If I close the door and I right away open it up, what did that show? That the only reason why I close the door is to make a kinyan. If I'm closing the door because I need the door closed, that doesn't make a kinyan. So really, it's the closing of the door that did the kinyan. But how is it clear that you're closing it l'shem kinyan and not l'shem there's a draft coming in? Not l'shem there's someone on the other side that I'm afraid that person is going to breach into my house. You have to close it and you have to reopen it. What made the kinyan? The closing. Like we learned before. Yeah, guys, closing the door is always helpful because now the house is more guarded. But it has to be clear that you did that l'shem kinyan. Halacha yudal ketzar amachzik v'gdiras kol shulchana. You have to enclose it, even the most minute amount. Kegoin shoyu shem gader. If you had a fence, but it was a low fence, and people or animals can easily climb over it. If you added the smallest amount of height, which, for example, it was under 10 tefachim, and now you made it into 10, right? That's the rule. 10 tefachim is enough of a fence. Where did we just have this, guys, yesterday when we learned the dinim of the mitzvah of making a guardrail? So the mitzvah was to make a guardrail of 10 tefachim. That's called it was beneficial. And therefore, similarly, if there was an opening, there was a breach. Whether it's people or whether it's animals, and you made the breach a little bit wider, which allows whoever is using that opening not to feel so confined, so in Yiddish, parkvetched when they go through it. Another detail, if the purchaser simply places a rock down, and that placement helped, as we'll give an example, so you have an irrigation canal, and it's not completed. You understand? And you did something that finalized the connection, and now the water in the canal will go into your field. Or the opposite, there was a canal and there was a blockage. And you just remove the stone, guys. The stone is not even mechuber there. It doesn't matter. And through your removing of the stone, it helped the water flow better. I'm just curious, in all of these cases, do you have to put the stone back for a moment? Not. Only by the door. By the door, you have to close it and right away open. You're buying your neighboring property. You're receiving it as a gift. Now, what will be helpful? There are natural partitions or not natural. People had properties adjacent. There's a partition. If you remove the partition, that's hoyel. That's beneficial. That is a kinyan. Walking in a newly acquired property is garnished. It's not effective. It's not an act of kinyan. Right? So your kid has this niggin, Hagatal of Ramavinu, to walk in the land, so here we learn that it does not affect the king. Now, if he bought a right-of-way passage through a vineyard, that's all he's buying. Since I'm buying a road, I'm buying a path, the whole thing is made to walk on. Walking there is enough. That's beautiful. Halacha Yudal. Now another thing, a simple kasha. If Yaron is selling me his path, well, if there's walls, you know where the path is. You know the beginning and the end. If there's no walls on both sides, so you look on the ground and you see a path. You can figure it out. It can be a machlekes. How much of it? Sometimes it's more rubbed out. Sometimes it's less rubbed out. So if it's defined by barriers, even if the barriers are so straight, are so narrow, that you can barely pick up a foot and put down a foot. You have to walk sideways. That's it. That was the path. You see, that's the path. Obviously, if it was smaller than that, then you also acquired a bit more because you made up that you're buying a pathway. But the image on mechitzas, that's a good kasha. So how much of the pathway you're kind of it's a bit big enough for you to be able to put a streimel. It's interesting, a peckle of twigs on your head, and for you to comfortably be able to turn around. That is the space on the ground that you acquired through the kinyan of walking on it, because that's what's needed for a path. Halacha tezvav. You have a rocky patch of earth, that it's not serving, right? It cannot be enclosed with a fence. All of these patches cannot be used as an entrance. It cannot be sowed. You cannot be zoideya. How do you manifest ownership when there's very little to use the land for? Well, people would always use even inferior land as a place to spread out produce. So, or storage, putting your animal there. And guys, in all of these cases, again, what's the rule? If I'm doing it in the context of we're buying it, I'm buying it in front of the moicher, I did that, I'm koine it. If I'm not doing it in front of the moicher, prior to putting my animal there, he has to tell me lech chazei kuknei, because if he doesn't tell that to me, you're kidding. When I visit your property, I park my car in your parking lot. It doesn't show I'm buying it in itself. Halacha tezvav. The nichnas v'alekeach. Halacha tezayin, right? And the nichnas v'alekeach. And what did he do? Uzura. He put seeds. Or nutter here means he was chodesh it. He plowed it. Oisha asaf peda. So he gathered the fruits from the trees. He pruned the trees. In other words, all of this shows even if the moicher, after they agreed to buy and sell it, the moicher went and he gathered a basket of fruits and he gave the basket to the lekeach. You understand? The lekeach, of course, is kind of the basket. The lekeach is kind of the whole field. Kana halekeach miyad, right away, by taking ownership of the basket, because that's an act That's megala das sheikna lo yasod l'kinyan gamer. And of course, v'naso peiros of shaloi. Halacha Yud Zayin. Hagoy eina koina b'chazak. There's no such a kinyan by goyim ela b'shtar hu koina with money. The Yisrael haba representing a goy. If you're representing the goy, then you have the rules of kinyanim will be like of the goys. Ve'eina koina ela b'shtar. Another big cloud. Kol hamechuber lakarka automatically is kekarka, and therefore v'mikna either kesef or shtar or chazaka. However, if something is mechuber lakarka, the einoi the imin tzarach lakarka, for example, but they are already mature enough to be harvested, it means they don't need to be connected. And kinyane metaltalin, just as an example, there's no such a thing as chazaka by metaltalin. We're going to learn today other kinyane metaltalin in the chapter. Another rule that there's something called oina'a, as we read in the intro. We're not talking about oina'as devarim, but we're speaking about overcharging, right? Cheating financially. When it comes to real estate, there is no such a concept of overcharging, halachically. You can sell the smallest piece of land for $1 billion, and that is the value. Vaharaya, come to LA, you'll see exactly. Masha'enkin, by metaltalin, there is something called a market value, and if you overcharged a sixth, the money has to be returned, the money has to be readjusted, and if you overcharged more than a sixth, then the whole nekach is bottle, as we'll learn soon. Dinei oina. So the moment it doesn't need the land, it's included in dinei oina. Halacha yudches. Everything, all of the above regarding sale, kach, equally. Renting land, again, like the Rambam wrote, the Mekoyma is that not everything needed to be documented. Halacha yutes. Person is selling to his friend 10 pieces of land in 10 countries. Today, there's a new website, Yaron, that is the largest real estate website in the world. It has 750,000 listings from all around the world.
752.
What's it called, Yaron?
MLS Worldwide.
MLS Worldwide. So you're the MLS Worldwide, and you have a few dollars, and you find 10 pieces of real. You want to buy in every country, you want to have a piece of property. So now the question is, do you need to make a kinyan on every one? And the answer will be, remember the Gemara, Sadna the Arachadu. The earth is one. So just like if I'm buying one piece of property, I don't have to make a kinyan in this inch and in that inch. You make it one. Even though they're separated by a lot of space, one is good for all. Now, guys, don't forget, there's Gemiras Das for the Moicher to sell all 10. The Lekeach already wants to buy, that has to be clear. Now they're doing the kinyan. They're kind of, even if they're different lands. One is on a high mountain, the other one is in a mitzul in a valley. The final halacha of this chapter. This is important. You have to give money for all 10. Now hold on, if you're giving the money out on, why do you even need to make a chazaka? Why do you need to make a chazaka? Because again, Magen Mishnah says, and Rambam already told us that in many places, and by the way, that's our culture. Land is not finalized only with money. So before that, Rambam wrote about, you have to make a shtar. Emes, but you can also make a chazak. That's the case here. So when you gave all the money, so it's clear you're buying all of it, and you only made the chazak in one, you're kind of all. If you didn't pay for all of it, you have to, how much money did you give? Only the value against your money. And therefore, whenever you're not giving it's not a sale, if it's a gift, then it's also enough to make a kinyan in one, because there no money has to be exchanged.
What can't you say? Sorry, what can't you say it's a portion of all properties? You paid a percentage of all properties. Because
Kevan, it has to be clear verbal communication. There has to be clear consent to what? The chiddush is that even though they said, Kevan, let's say I own 10 properties in 10 different countries, and you are going to buy it, and I said I'm selling all of them, and you say I agree to buy. Still, the halacha is when you make a kinyan in one, you're not kind of all of it. Because we say there wasn't full Gemiras Das. If you get the money for all, if I got the money for all of it, then there's a full Gemiras Das. And I'll tell you something, the Kesef Mishnah adds, when the Rambam writes, V'chein b'schirus goes like in a gift, that you don't have to give the money for all. By sale of land, you have to give the money up front to be able to do a kinyan and one for all. Being that people pay rent at the end, that's the way it works, at least in the Torah. I don't know the Goyish law over here. Schirus is paid at the end. So therefore, you don't expect to get the money up front. And therefore, making a kinyan, I'm renting 10 different properties. I made a chazak in one, there's no money. Anyways, you're not getting the money. You mix it like our kois v'mecher, mix it with the schirus. So even though it's different types of transactions, this is amazing. Doesn't matter in which one you did the kinyan. Now, like we said, for sale, you have to give the money for all of it. That nuance, add everything you know above. But the point is that even though it's a sale and it's a rental, same. Kona hakoil. Wow. Okay, that was great. Moving on to today's second chapter. So we're going to go through a system. So based on the Hagdama in Perek Rishon, that Gemiras Das without a kinyan is Einoi Klum. You have to make a kinyan. Now we're going to speak about the kinyan that's needed for an Eved. We're speaking obviously about an Eved Kanani that in many areas is Kikarka. And as we'll see, that making a kinyan chazaka on an Eved will be effective. Dinoi Kikarka. And also Dinoi Kenyonim on livestock. And livestock is not going to be included in Metaltalin. Metaltalin is, God willing, going to be today's third chapter, Perek Shlishi. You got a Karka, one category. Eved Behema, second category. This chapter, and then all other Metaltalin. Halacha, Perek Sheni, Hot, 10 Halacha, says that I'm a Malacha Aleph. Eved Kanani, Hareyu Kekarka Lakniyam, and therefore, like we learned in the previous chapter, V'nikna B'Kesed, Oy B'Shtara B'Chazaka. Now, Kesed, we understand. We don't have it, at least we understand it. We think we understand it. Shtar, we get, how do you make a chazak and an evet? So we learn by karka, no'al, godar, parats. What do you do by the evet? Says the Rambam, malacha bezu, mahi chazaka b'kiyin avadim, she'ishtamish boy, you should make use of this servant, k'derech she'mishtamshem ba'avadim. Same thing we learned by karka, chazaka has to be done b'fnei rabbi, yakir, or the rabbi said before, leich chazeku kni, and then you make the king and chazak. Now, what type of ishtamshus are we talking about? For example, Ketzah, the servant unties the new master's shoes in front of the old master. He put his shoes on. He helped you schlep your stuff to the bathhouse. He helped you get on guard. He anointed you. He kratzed you, he combed you, he helped you get dressed, or he lifted up the master, or the opposite. It's not a king and hagba, guys. It's just another way of showing ownership over kanahu. Now, if the new owner pushes means he physically moves him. This is going to be in contrast to Yakir, calling an Evet, and the Eved moves because you called him. And as we will see, by a behema, that's enough. Being that an Eved has more das, even though he responded to your calling, but he was the one that did it, like the snake. The person put a snake on the hand of the other. At the end, the snake chose to bite. So by an Eved, moving means you have to physically push him. That is needed. But what not? If you call to the servant, even though you called his name, and he came because you called him, not enough. Or if the original rabbi tells him, listen, go to the lekeach, and he walked to the lekeach, lekana. How bitkifa? I know, guys, the literal type of tkifa means to push. It doesn't mean to push away. It can mean to push close. It means there has to be a physical movement that was caused, cause and effect. Huh? He has to assert the gashmis, or any of the above. Untying the shoes, putting on the shoes. Like we have by karka, prior to the kinyan, the seller has to tell the buyer, the gifter has to tell to the recipient of the gift, since the Evet has no das, here he will be like a behemoth. And like we just spoke out above, that by an animal, Meshicha doesn't have to mean bitkifa. Meshicha can be by calling to the animal. Evet katan, if you call him and he comes, it's also enough because there's less das on the Evet. So the movement is more attributed to you. Kind of nice about Vadim Shekanim Avahema, Uvad Vadim Shekanim Avadim. You're both Chazaka and just calling out to him. Lefikach nichla b'Mashicha, Afapi Yishaloi to Kafoi, Mamish like a Behema. Which is great. In other words, the mile of our generation, we have less das. Halavai will be like Avodim Ketanim. The mile of that is that when the Rebbe tells us to do something and we do it, it's we're more bottled to the Rebbe. It's more the Rebbe's doing. There's bigger brachas. The more ich bin am größer, even though I'm responding to the Rebbe's calling, but then it's me. If it's me, then it's stuck to me. It's amazing. You're great, but it could have been greater if it would have been the Rebbe's doing. Right. Halacha hey, habehema, livestock. So let's go. Bein daka, bein gasa. So we're familiar with this. By kachim, daka means sheep, goats, right? They're called smaller animals. Gasa, I know by kachim, you only have the cattle. Here, it's not about the kosher. The gasa means, just to know, donkeys are called gasa, susim are called gasa, and cattle. Niknas b'Mashiach, there's no difference. And now we're introducing a very important klal that we have to know also for the next chapter. When it comes to moving an item, there are two ways of moving it. Let me use the words meshicha. Meshicha means drawing it towards you, even though meshicha sometimes can mean pushing it. And then there's lifting it. There's a big klal by metaltalin. Anything that could be in any item in which hagba'ah is possible, meshicha won't be enough, or certainly not lechatchila. Better hagba'ah than meshicha. And even when you're doing meshicha, we already just learned this recently. There's a big difference. If I do meshicha in the domain of you, the original owner, it's b'chlal nothing. B'chlal nothing. If I do hagba'ah in the domain of the original owner, it is effective because anything in my hand is in my domain. So now that you know that hagba'ah is a lot better than meshicha, says the Rambam that meshicha is enough. And we'll see again in the next chapter that normally we would say, do hagba'ah, not meshicha, not by animals. Why? Because when you lift an animal, what happens when you put it back down? You give it a clap. So if something is a metaltal and inanimate doimim, so what? But you don't want to hurt the animal. So there's an upside in making meshicha. Now, b'chlal, hagba'ah is kind of a b'chol makim, like we just mentioned. That means even if I am in the reshus of the makne, my hand is the reshus of the koina, so it's effective. Abel ha-meshicha, if I do meshicha in the reshus of the original owner, it's ineffective. What do you mean I took it to me? It's not me, I'm in your domain. Where is it effective? Either in a simta. A simta means not in the reshus harabim proper, but in alleys off the reshus harabim, or in a yard that belongs to both. And what not only is it not effective in the reshus of the makna, the ein koinen ba, the reshus harabim. Wow. Even in the reshus harabim, it's not good enough. In other words, wherever the location is meant for everyone to be using it equally, like a reshus harabim, it's not mine enough. People don't stop there. People are not allowed to take dominion of the look. In a simta, even though it's public, I have the right to stop more. Like you're driving over here. If you stop on La Cienega, you don't have the right to do that. In the alley, you can stop. If a car comes, you'll have to move. The more rights you have, the more it's shaykh to say it's yours for Mashiach to be effective. That in Mashcha v'holcha, of course that's good. Or even if you rode on it and you made it move. Avade. Chiddush is, but unlike by an eved, by a behema, afilu karala, you only verbally entice the animal to move, and it came to you. Or shekisha b'makel, that's indirect movement. You hit it with the stick, and the animal moved. The animal ran. You kidding? And find that also when you hit it with the stick, that means you didn't. You're doing one thing that makes the animal move. The animal has to be oiker, both a yad and a regel. Not all four, one front leg, one hind leg. then kana'ah. And like we learned above, all of this is effective only if you did this in front of the owners. But if you did an act of Mashiach not in front of the original owners, there has to be a pre-step, and that is that the original owner says, Leich, Mishoich Ukenei. Guys, it's gavaldik that we're being consistent. It's easy to remember this. Halacha Zayin. If a person is selling an entire herd, so guys, unlike karka that we learned in the previous chapter, if you own 10 pieces of real estate, it's shaykh in many circumstances for me to make a kinyan and one and to acquire all of them, not by a herd. Now, we also mentioned by animals, Mashiach doesn't have to mean I did physical Mashiach to each one. I have to cause all of them to move, but I have to move all of them. So if you're buying, what we're going to get there. Whoa, 1 second. So he says like this, that these herds, there is a leader. Herds, there's a leader. Herd. The leader is the dog. The leader is a black sheep, a white sheep, Chazal gives, and they follow the leader. So when you give over the mashkuchis, when you give over that, what the Rambam says, that is like a key. And we spoke out on the previous chapter, it's a machlokes Rashbam and the Rambam. The Rambam learns that Masiras Mafteach is not a kinyan, but it's at least, it substitutes the leich chazeku kni. In our chapter, it's gonna substitute the leich mishoich kni. You don't acquire the whole herd because you got the yakir, your dog. No. Abir, that's gavaldik. And now that you already got that out of the way, kivin shemashach, the whole eder. Kano. That was an important rule, guys. Mishoich v'sikna. That means he's using lashon asid. You have to learn digduk whether you like digduk or not. You know what he's saying? He's saying go make a mashiach, and then in the future you will acquire it. That's by mashiach by metaltalin, right? We learned it even though the chapter is more evid than behema, but that's also included in metaltalin. Or if it's coming to karka, when it's not bifnei hamoiched, we learned in the previous chapter, there has to be that statement. But again, he uses lashon asid, chazak v'sikna, and v'chayoytze b'dvarim elu. And the guy went to halachol mashach or vehichzik loy kana. Why? Because the word tikna means lahabam, means I'll agree to sell it to you, but it's not going to happen now. Va'adayin lo hikna loy. Go, mishoich, perform a shicha, or perform a chazaka, and this is in English, acquire it. You understand? Not then you will acquire it. Acquire it. And let's go further based on this concept. But he says, make the kinyan now, but you will only acquire it. No, he's not telling him to acquire it later. He's saying that the chalois of the kinyan should only take place after 30 days. The halacha is that if such an act happened, loy kana. So like this, during the kinyan, the owner did not want to give it then. During the kinyan, he said after 30 days. By 30 days, there's no kinyan. And you need to have Gemiras Das and a king. You never have that Suzamin. You never have that together. But if he tells them, that's important. That's something else. In other words, the kinyan is effective now. Let's say the reshus of hishtamshus should only begin after 30 days. There's the item that you own, and because you own the item, you have the right of usage. When a person says, not either, he's saying both. Acquire it now, and after 30 days, what is meant is the etzem, you're kind of now. However, I'm still going to use it. Many people, they sell a house, they do that. They're selling a house now, but they tell the buyer, listen, I don't have where to move into. I'll sell it now. I'm still here for a year. I'm using it. That's a good kinyan. In a year from now, you don't have to make another kinyan. Kana. Even in 30 days from then, the animal is not on the property of the buyer. The animal is in a swamp, in an agam. Doesn't matter. And similarly, whenever you say the words almanas, as we learned over there by the laws of Tanoim, I think we learned it by Kedushin or by Gerushin, is ko'imen ma'achshav. And as long as it's from now and later, that's the way we interpret it. The etzem now, and that is if the kinyan is effective. And just because I'm making a tanai that on the condition that I, the original owner, I don't own it anymore, but I still get to use it. It doesn't stop the kinyan from being effective. And after the tanai is met, I use it for 30 days. It automatically goes to you. Final halacha in the chapter halacha yud, a sale of an animal or a gift of an animal. It's gewaldig. So im Mashach, oihigbia, that for sure can. Avol im rachav. So this is an interesting thing. Why did he say kederech shebenei adam? So the Rambam is writing the common practice, and of course, if your society doesn't have this common practice, then it's not relevant. The Rambam is pointing out the following: in Basada, people would normally ride on animals outside of the city. And it wasn't that common for people, men, to ride animals in the city. All right? The rules. And since the Moichet expressed himself, make a king in Kederech, even though we just learned that moving the Shicha is effective by riding, you're making the animal move. No, but the Moichet says, I don't want it to be effective riding it in the city. And there's exceptions. Lefikach, an Adam Chashuv, which would ride on an animal even in the city, or the opposite. Adam mezuzul beyoyser she'ena makbet ali luchay be'iroichet. No, it's when you're living in a society, most people, they conform to the norms of society. Someone doesn't care about society. They'll be kind of. Kagoyin hametaplim begidul habehemus va'avadim. Or so these are the people that are called people that are mezuzul beyoyser, or that I'm saying that's their business. So they write on it. Or another category, women. No, it's animals. What's the challenge with animals? An animal is, if you're not strong, you can lose control over the animal. And you don't want to do that. The animal will go over there, how you go chase it. So women that are physically weaker, it was more common for them to ride on the animals just not to lose the animal. They'll be kind of it. What type of a Rishus Rabban where it's jam-packed with people? Here also, if I'm schlepping the animal with a rope, many people are packed in there. I'm afraid that I'll be separated from my animal, even though I'm strong. I would also ride in it. In all of these cases, kind of a rechiva in the city, but vehu shetahalach boy. It's sitting on the animal. The kinyan is meshicha, not sitting on the animal. So the definition of roich, that's a general statement, is because of me sitting on the animal, or while I'm sitting on the animal, it's really because of me being there. The animal is walking. I'm directing the animal's movement. It's the movement of the animal that affects the shichan. Now we are starting in today's third chapter. We learned karka, we learned eved and behema, and now Perek Shlishi is all about kinyanim of metaltalin. And if you remember, we have this whole machlekes between Rabbi Zajac and Reish Lakish, which is extremely important. Dvar Toina, like by Torah law, how do you affect the kinyan? The Rambam paskins like Rabbi Zajac, the rule is we paskin like Rabbi Zajac, that money is enough of a kinyan for metaltalin, even though, as we all remember, the Chachamim, according to that understanding, they took away the power of kesef to finalize a sale because of a reason, and the poil, the sale of metaltalin is only finalized if you did. We'll see Hadba Meshicha as we'll learn inside this chapter. Halachal echad habehema. The echad sha'ar metaltalin. Even though the Rambam put behema in the previous chapter, but as far as a lot of the dinim minegeya kinyonei metaltalin, it includes behema. It does not include avadim. See, avadim are like karkois. The reason why you can make a kinyan by a evet kesef shtar or chazaka, that's because that's the rule by karka. There's no chazaka by metaltalin. There's no chazaka by behemoths. So we're avadim out. Behema was put in the previous chapter as just for an example. If you call to the animal and he comes because of your calling, that's called meshicha. That's not shayach by metaltalin. That's not alive. That's why we're making a separate chapter. But let's put now all together. Metaltalin and animals, they are nicknamed b'mois den Torah. Rabbi Zajac. Even though, in other words, even though the buyer did not take possession of, doesn't matter. And Mishayitan as Hamois Kana. And the Ein Echad Mehem Yochel Achzavoi. However, even according to this opinion, Abel Chachamim Tiknu Shlo Yikana Mataltlin Ela Bahagba'am, which is like we mentioned in the previous chapter, is certainly ideal. Oy the Mashiachas Davar she'ein darka la'agbiyah. And that Rambam also added in the previous chapter that even where people are able to lift animals, since an animal is a living being, if you lift it, you got to put it back down. When you put it back down, you can bang it, you can clap it. So the Chachamim said Mashiach is you don't have to do Hagbah. But generally, by Betaltalin, Hagbah is better. If you can't do Hagbah, then you can do Mashiach. And again, just to review in the previous chapter, Hagbah is going to be a valid king, and even if you are in the reshus of the original owner, and Mashiach B'chlal is not called Mashiach. If you are B'reshus HaMakna, it only works, like we mentioned, if it's in your own reshus or B'simta, Ba'ayin in the previous chapter. Halacha Beis, Ketzah. Hamakabeitz Eitzim. If a person is gathering together wood, or if you're gathering a bundle of pishtam, the chayotze b'hem, and you made it into one pekel, v'asa mehen to ungodly, and it's so heavy now that you can't lift it. He's just trying to find an example. Why would you do Mashiach if he's saying you should do Hagbah? So over here, you would argue, okay, now it's too heavy. Unbundle it. Unbundle it. It's at kedekach important to do Hagbah and not Mashiach. Now, unbundling wood is a toirech, but it's not a tircha yesera. In contrast to what we're going to have soon in a moment. So then, why? Unbundle the aguda and pick up every single piece of wood and then rebundle it. But that's because every piece of wood is, a chaticha it's a shtickle, it's a wood, a block. But if a person bundled already together peppers or nuts or almonds, in other words, items that are very little, I know I can undo the package and repackage it. But now we were speaking about a big work, not heavy work, just many things to put back together. But oh, you godol, and now it's such a big package. Then use Mashiach, because she'im yatirenu and yisparei v'yeboy toirach godol. If there's no toirach godol, make hagbah. If there's no toirach godol, make hagbah. If there's a toirach godol, then they allowed you to do Mashiach v'chein chol chayotza bohen. Halacha yim. Haspina. It's one item that's extremely heavy. And now it's even more than that. How do you schlep a boat? Big boats. Even though, by the way, it was not that rare. Right? We learned about measuring land. We just learned this in I think it was in Gezelam, that the banks on both sides of the rivers that were used by the sailors to schlep the boats. There, you're not medagdeg b'mida when you buy it and sell it, because anyways you don't really have full rights over it. It's being used by the public, but you need to have many people moving it. The I know it says larabim, it means l'chayra. It can only be schlepped barabim, with many. So lo yitzrichu Mashiach. Now I got a problem, because I get it. Before he spoke about something that's too heavy to lift, so at least move it. That I understand. Something that's too heavy to lift. Today, you can't lift the table, you push the table. What do you do with something that you can't even push? So how do you affect the kinyan in something that big? So the word is, the kinyan is called kinyan mesida. Big machlokas rishonim. What is kinyan mesida? One of the ways will be that you're giving over, you're handing over the rope that was used to schlep the boat. Handing over the rope is enough of a kinyan.
Is a part must be done physically by the person, or if a person uses a tool, for instance, to fix something out?
So if you remember in the Gemara, we learned that there was an elephant, it was an animal, and one opinion was insisting in Hagbah. So what they did was they moved.
The leg, no?
No. There was like this pulley system. Yeah. 1 second. What was the word? He put something. The animal was on one side of like a seesaw, and he placed something down over here, and he caused the animal to go.
And it was big.
And that was called Hagbah.
So you can use technology for
so the Akira is saying you can use technology for Hagbah.
Forklift. You have a pallet of goods. You lift it up with the forklift.
Yes.
On that bar.
Yeah. Again, Mesira, it's not so pashut, but let's just say we're going to learn later more details that giving over the rein of the animal, if it's an elephant, like it's too big even to be Mashiach, that's enough. And if it's not b'fnei hamoicher, guys, this is already the third chapter. Such a statement has to happen. Now, he didn't say be koined through Masira. By the way, he doesn't have to say anything because that's in his presence. He's giving it over. Leich mishoich, you got to schlep it. Now, another detail, how much do you have to move it? So you have to see what area in the water is the boat occupying. It has to be fully removed from that area. The Yotzia min hamakim, fully out of the place where it was, and you have to do Mashiach. Too late. And it could even be the Moicher. The Moicher will learn, he learned Mishnayos, he knows these in him. You got to say Lech Mishoichu Knei, Lech Mishoichu Knei. He didn't chap Lech Mishoichu Knei. If that's what you said, that's what he has to do. Halacha Dal. Im say Salamich Alekech Metaltalin. Now, not to get ahead of ourselves, if you remember the sugya of Misha Para, we'll learn this soon. Don't think that, the Chachamim have a lot of koyach, but the Rabbi Yochanan says, din toira kesef is koinem. Even not all the kesef. Once you did something that biblically affects a king, if any party will pull out, even though the Rambam says, Yachal lachzaboy, they're not going to be scot-free. There's going to be a curse that will be placed on them. We'll learn that later. Point is that if the guy is going to be makabel the Mishapara, now that the Chachamim says you have to make a king in the Shicha, so the bottom line is that with the consequences you come back out. Goes both ways. Either Sheyakbia, which is ideal, or Yimshech Davar She'enim and Hagbah, or as we learned, if you can't even do Mashicha easily, you can't even do it with effort. You have to make a Toirach Gadol, or Yimser HaMoichel Lekech Davar She'ein Darkali Moshech. The kivin sheikbia or mashach davar sheinak leikbia or nimsul davar shein darkali mashach. Then kana now the ein echad nehem yochel machzeboy yochel lachzeboy. And by the way, the money was not given yet. So another detail. The koifen es lekech litan esadonim. So what we're saying is not kesed and hagbah. Now that the chachamim say you do hagbah / meshicha / mesira, even if no money was exchanged, the kinyan is done. And now it's like a choiv. Anytime you owe money, you got to pay the money. That what that mois is not koina, since the Rambam paskins that didn't koina, it is koina. Gezeda. Shema yiten alakech the me'achepis. He'll give the money, which means he'll own it. But prior to him taking it, something will happen completely beyond the control of the seller. For example. Now, sometimes that's life. But you know what? Many times, if there is a fire burning in the Uven's house, and the Uven knows that there's a limited amount of stuff that he can save, you can't blame the Uven for saving his passports, for saving his safe. You begin to prioritize. Since Kesev is koina, that means that the seller knows this was already sold, belongs to him. He's not wrong to leaving it the last on the list. And he will not save it. Now, I know that when you read these words, it's hard to touch, because what I just said was the item is physically in whose reshus? The moicher. I know the Rambam means that. The Rambam is saying that if we're going to allow for the din Torah to be halachically effective, which would mean that this article really is under the halachic possession of the lekeach. So the moicher is not concerned about that. It's not his anymore. Right? I'm not mechuyev to save yours before I save mine. Yismaneya hamoicher v'lo yatziloi. And therefore, they say halachically it's still the moichers. Because since halachically now it's still the moichers, if it gets lost, chayv l'shalim. Chayv l'shalim means what, guys? They'll have to return the money. Because when they said that Kesef is not going to affect the full kinyan, even though it's enough for the Mishapara, they'll have to return the money. So it's actually for the benefit of the lekeach that the mois is not koina. Then says oimer sheim nasan the miyameka. V'nen nas koidim sheyikachenu. Yomer loy halokeyach. Tenli mikri oy hachsali asma oisamos. Even though an oinus happened, he has the right to say it. Afal pishi yesh edim. The moicher says, "What are you talking about? I wasn't negligent. A fire burnt the house down. Even where he was unable to be effective, anyways. Even if he was not lazy, once the Chachamim said that kesef is not koine, kesef is not koine. Harei zamachzer adamim sharei tiknu Chachamim mishicha, and that's the koyach of the Chachamim. Lefikach im hoysa beis sholikeach. Now, we're coming to this. Sheyesh vayachefetz animkar muskala moicher. This is the first time that Rambam is addressing this indirectly. If you own a house and you rent out that property, I want to ask you a question. Who does the house belong to? Now, for mezuzah, it belongs to the guy that's living there. We know that, right? Psachim, for the guy that, for bedikas chametz, for the guy who lives there. I want to know be'emes, b'negeya, ownership. So the halacha is that it belongs enough to the moicher. So if the lekeach is the owner, even though it's amazing, the moicher is the renter. So when I gave money, what do I need to do? I have to take possession of it. There's something called king and chatzah. That's the way we learn pshat. If the item that I paid for is already in my reshus, then it's by me. I don't need the mashich. It's in my reshus. Then I'll be koined. Like
So the buyer is the renter.
The buyer is the rent. It's amazing. The buyer, no.
He's buying an item that's
No, the
already
buyer,
in the house.
yes.
And based on that, he acquires it.
Because the mekach is already b'reshus alikeya. And therefore, now, guys, you need to have money. Now the question, I have one question over here. Was this acquired through king and kesef? Eloma, kesef, Chachamim said you have to have Mashiach, not in this case. Or is it king and chatzir? That's the issue over here. That's
They haven't really brought up the concept of king and chatzir.
I know that. That's why the Rambam doesn't. It's a side thing. It's just pointing out that since be'emes kesef is koina, there'll be cases where only giving the kesef will affect the king. The poil will affect the king. Halacha zay. If the buyer rented the space, then here, kana. It's mamish the opposite. The buyer rented the space. And again, do you have to give money here? Do you have to give money here? You know, it's you can learn that the chen is that since they did not want for there to be a scenario where the moicher will be nesrasha, here it's not even shaykh. It's already in the reshus of the lekeach. What is the Rambam getting to? Schiras karka is like kiniyas karka. That one of the ways, therefore, to acquire metaltalin is only to be soicher karka, and by karka kesed does it. There's no chachamim takon. So if I'm soicher with kesed, the karka under which the metaltalin are in, and now the metaltalin is in that chutzner, I'll acquire it. Oh, that's the whole new Pesach of making a kinyan without doing a Mashiach. Allah cheches. Where do we do this, guys? In every Mechiras Chametz sale. No, it's we're renting to the goy. We're renting to the goy the place, the cabinet, the place where the Chametz is in. Now we're going to speak about what we call king and agav. So this opened up the whole parsha of king and agav. It's called king and agav karka, or just king and agav. Halachiches. Hamakna karka metaltalan ke'ech. If a person is bequeathing or selling, transferring karka and metaltalan, kiven shekana hakarka, as we learned in Perek Aleph today, either b'kesef or b'shtar or b'chazaka, and kesef is enough. So then niknu hamataltalin automatically ima. Bein shahoyashneim b'mecher. It doesn't mean that they have to be. It can be both sale, both matana, or no. The metaltalin is being sold. The karka is a gift, or the other way around. The karka is being sold, and the nasan hamataltalin. Kiven shekana hakarka kana hamataltalin. This is called kinyan agam. Abamed varamam boram alachates. The metaltalin was collected within the landed property. But if the metaltalin is in another location, he's not saying it's not effective, but you have to do something else. The seller has to verbalize, and you know what? They don't have to be together. They can be 1,000,000 miles apart. I know it's not shaykh that, but plain is Kiven shekona karka nikla metaltalin. Afapisha ain't sevurim b'toicham. Now it's not shot that the metaltalin, like we learned in Halacha Zayin, is in the reshus of the lekeach. No, it's in another place. King and Agav works.
So piggybacking on the same.
And the Chachamim did not make takonas for oy bazoi. Maybe again, in that case, there's going to be a fire. The mokim hametaltalin and the moicha won't make. We don't do that. This works. The im like armor like knei gav karka, then like kana. If it's not svurim b'toicha, that's so clear. Svurim b'toicha, you don't need that statement. Not svurim b'toicha, you have to make that statement. And now another detail: how much land do you have to acquire? You don't need to have a lot of land. It can be the smallest amount of property. Wow. Let's go even more. So like we mentioned in the first chapter, when you make a kinyan, who is the main player, the moiched or the lekeach? People say, Lamai nafkamina. I'll give you your first nafkamina. You have a moiched and he's selling something to two buyers. One moiched to two buyers. To one, he's selling land. To the other, he's selling metaltalin. Falpisha Omar Loi. Knei hametaltalin al gava karka. And the hechziko echad bekarka. One lekeach made the kinyan. In our work, and out there, this is a suffix in the Gemara. There's a suffix that was not resolved, and the Rambam, as we keep on learning, whenever there's a monetary suffix in the Gemara that the Gemara doesn't come to a solution with, the Rambam paskins the suffix. Means the halach is suffix. So, loikana hasheri hamataltalin, but the im tafasan achash chazer by hamakna. Guys, if the makna was not chazer, who cares? What now they're retracting? Ein mitzino ismiyadai. And I'll tell you the lumdus over here. If the main actor is the lekeach, so there's two lekuchas. How can the kinyan of one be effective for the other? Yeah. If the main player is the moicher, there's only one moicher. Amazing. Even though he sold karka to one, metaltalin to the other, and you want to use the kinyan, doesn't matter. There was a kinyan for both. Halacha yudal. Hamakna v'adam v'kakoyski echad. So Atkan was metaltal and agav karka. What about avodim agav karka? So hechzik ba'avodim loikona hakarkois. Hechzik ba'karkois loikona ha'avodim. So really, there is a king and agav, but only in the direction of the eved is going to piggyback. I don't like that word; it's not kosher animal. It's going to be agav the karka. But here, unlike by metaltalin, that you even have an option of einam tzevurim b'toichai, as long as the moich says knei al gav karka. By avodim, there's no such option. It has to be there. Why? Because since the eved is mahalech lidas atzmai, it's when I'm selling movable items and I say, be kind at al gav karka. I make the metaltalin tuffle to the karka. I made it tuffle with my words. Why? You can think about it, but it's not there. How do my words affect it? Because since I theoretically, I have the koyach to pick the metaltalin and move it on the karka, metaltalin don't move on their own. So since I could have done it, so even though I didn't do it, I have the power to connect it. That's the pshat on the Rambam. But since avada are mahalchim l'das atzman, so if they're there, they're there. If they're not there, you can't say I can put them there. They can walk away. It's not enough. So it's not going to be effective. Halacha Yud Beis, hamakna avodim u'metaltalin ki'echad. No, you're transferring it to the same loikeyach. Now it's avodim and metaltalin. Mashach metaltalin loikon avodim. Hechzik ba'avodim loikon metaltalin. But here again, you know what we say, Danny? Avodim are like karka. And if metaltalin is on karka, king and agav. But it has to be on them. LMK no agav or evet. It's amazing. And not only does it have to be al gav or evet, but there's another detail. Now, now we're going to go into king and chatzah, guys. I just want to say the words. A chatzah acquires for you because the chatzah is stationary. The challenge with an evet, even though the Torah compares an evet to a karka, but it's a moving chatzah. A moving chatzah cannot acquire. So you have to take away the moving problem. How do you do that? By binding the evet. Just to know the words, guys. It's called chatzah mehaleches loikoina. That's the words. But karka kekarka. So if you bind the evet and you put the metaltalin on the evet, since she'enu yochel halachba, so it's called king and agav. You made the king and andavadim, you acquired. Now, if you're not selling it to the same lekeach, that was halacha yud. There's a suffix in halacha. Halacha yud gimel. Hamakna meime v'kelim she'al gaba ke'echad. Now let's go weiter. Kalim and behemoths together. The kalim are on the behemoths. Here, afal pisha mashach habehema ukana. Even though you made a king and on the animal, lekana kalim she'aleh. You will not acquire the kalim until you make a hagba on the kalim, or until you make mishicha on the kalim themselves. And Bachlal, let's not forget that Rambam keeps on emphasizing Meshicha is only where ain't darkan lagbiyah. Why? Shabehema kechatzer hamehalechasi. Here again. And therefore, I take back what I said before. It's not because avodim are like karka, it's because avodim is like your chatzir. And behema can also serve as your chatzir. And the problem with the behema and the evet is only because it's mahalecha. So if you resolve that by binding them, okay, it's important. In other words, king and agav doesn't have to be on karka. It has to be on something secondary to something primary. That's why in halacha yud, if it's karka and avodim, you can't make a king on the evet and connect with it to karka. Because karka is not tafel to the evet. So you have to look at two items. If you can say that B is tafel la aleph, you can make a king and an aleph, but there's details. So it has to work how? King and chatzah. So it has to be al gaba and has to be bound. Yes, Danny.
But if you're doing Mashiach on an animal and he's got a load on his back, you want to be clear that that load
also. It's amazing. Without, it doesn't work.
So you do Mashiach on the load.
You have to take it off. 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 Yeah. Halacha yudal. Amalei amakne mishoich behemazu uknei kelim she'oleha. In other words, halacha yudalit, he's not selling the animal. It's not like before. He's only selling the kelim. He's just telling the buyer, make mashiach on the animal and you'll acquire it. Says that Rambam hoyel v'lohiknu legufa behema. Afa pisha meshacha. And even if the animal was bound, like kana kelim sholeh, shim shaka kelim atzmam. In other words, if it's your chatzir is kaina. I chatzir mehaleches is not kaina. Bind if it's tied up, if it cannot walk. Here it's not your chatzir. You move the kelim because you moved the animal, garnished. Halacha tazva. Now we have throughout halacha this issue of a perforated pot, that if there is a hole large enough for a shoydish cotton to go out, and it's within a certain distance from the land, it's considered land, which is amazing because we just established that if you acquire karka kol shahu, king and agav karka, you can be kind of kelim. Now, when you have a perforated pot, Danny, and you have one plant in it, is the pot karka? No. What's karka? The plant. How great is that? So who is tafel to who? So the big pot is going to be secondary to the plant. Plant has a din of karka. How are you kind of karka, guys? Kesed, oishtar, oy chazaka. So it's an amazing concept. You can do chazaka to the little plant and you'll be kind of the atzis. It belongs to the same seller. I'm sorry. In case of halacha 15 is that the pot belonged to one owner. The zroyim in it belonged to another owner. The guy who already owns the zroyim is buying the pot. What is the pot, Danny? Metaltalin. Kiven shemashach kanon. That's step number one. In other words, the point is that karka is not niknes b'meshicha. You say, of course, you can't. If the din of the atzitz would have been karka, then meshicha would not have been enough. Rambam is emphasizing that the atzitz has a din of metaltalin. Now, hikna hazuroyim labal ha'atzitz, the other direction. They used to belong to two people. So now, loikana achiyachzik b'zroyim atzma. In other words, the zera, the zroyim have a din of a karka. And you know what you cannot use, Danny? You cannot use meshicha. Meshicha or hagba will not be enough. It's gavaldik.
So how do you acquire the plant?
How do you acquire the plant? You do something to the plant.
Let's see, it up doesn't work.
No, because dina ke karka. Halacha tazay. Now let's just give other scenarios based on the principle that the atzis, the taltalin, that's the principle, and the zera has a din of a karka. If they both belong to the same, and they're selling it or gifting it to the same recipient, hikna hakoy la'echad. The hechzik ba'atzitz liknais hazrayim. Hechzik ba'atzitz. That means you did something in the atzitz. You did nothing. Chazaka does not acquire metaltalin. Nothing was acquired. And on the opposite, it works. If you made a chazaka in the zroim, since zroim has a din of karka, and let's add to that, mekalkalin, arnitnin, agaf karka, so then it's as if you did a kinyan on the metaltalin, and you even were acquired the atzitz. And that's the meaning of the statement that we have in Mishnah, and the zuhi sheshanu, that nechasim she'ein lahem achrayis, first time we're having these words, property that's not used as a lien is a code word in Torah Shabbat Peh for metaltalin. That they are nicknamed in the chasim sheyesh lahem achrayis. I know it sounds like the simple application of any kinyan agav karka. No. The Chazal used this expression even in this case. This case is if you don't look at it through Torah glasses, it doesn't look. What do you mean? Which one has agav? Which one? Again, the point is you can have an otzitz that's humongous, Danny. An otzitz that you can barely lift. The zera can be one little plant. No, the zroyim is the yesh lamachrayis. Shazroyim shabatzitz nakov k'zroyim ba'aretz. V'cholam v'chol karka kekarka. And therefore, kinyan on the zera is going to be makna or affect a transference to the otzitz. Halacha Yud Zayin. Hoya kvar b'yanu shkol ha'emet lihi batzer. Anything that's physically connected. But if it does not need the land, like the example that Rambam gave in Perek Rishon was you have grapes and they are ready to be harvested. It's as if halachically they are already harvested. Now they're considered also metaltalin, and therefore halacha, the final halacha in this chapter, halacha Yudches Pishtan Shul Mechuver Lekarka the Yavash. Now it's not pshat, it matured. It became dry that it doesn't need the karka. So what did we just say, Danny? Dinoi kimetaltalin and va'amaloi yape li karka kol shehu uknei kol masha oleh. Clean out even a small amount of the land. And I want to add a detail, Danny. The seller is not selling the land. He only is giving him the land as rented property. And schiras, like kniya, is acquired through chazaka. Chazaka is manifesting ownership by bettering the land. And that's what he's saying. And taka, cleaning out the land from pishtan that no longer needs the land, is an act of the betterment to the land, which means it's an effective kinyan to the karka. Ironically, he's not touching the karka. He's just taking out a little piece of pishtan. But how much pishtan did he buy? Not only that which is in his hand, not only the pishtan upon which he made hagbah. That is the kinyan for the schirus of the karka. Agav karka, all of the flax he acquired. Even shatolish, even only kol shru kana hakoil b'pnei ta'izeh. Masha inkin avolim hikten lo ya pishtan hazeh b'mechere b'matana. In other words, there's no land involved, all the sale, the whole transaction is only regarding the Pishtan, even though the Pishtan is connected to the land, but like we learned in Halacha Yud Zayin, like we learned in Perek Aleph, something that no longer needs the land, Dino Kimetaltalin. The Taltalin, you have to do a Hagbah or Mashiach or Mesira. You can't decline it, you understand, through Chazaka. So when you lift it, okay, whatever you lifted, you acquired. And all the other flax is not acquired yet. Fantastic. God willing, to be continued.